Well, hello, everybody. I'm Ezra Levant. I'm at the Rebel News World headquarters in a bunker somewhere in Toronto. And joining me from out west is our chief reporter, Sheila Gunn-Reid. Sheila, how you doing?
Hey, Ezra, I'm great. Our graphics guys do such a great job. The background, the yellow background, the Saskatchewan background looks fantastic behind you.
Isn't that the truth? Thanks to Mike and the team for doing that, and thanks to Justin for working the control panel tonight. If you're wondering what we're doing, let me remove the wonderment and replace it with amazement. What we're doing is we are doing a live stream of the Saskatchewan leaders debate. It is election time in Saskatchewan. The vote's in 12 days, if I'm not mistaken. There's also an election afoot in British Columbia. We've been covering stories out there. I am very pleased to say that we have a crew in Saskatchewan. They're in Regina. Our reporter, Kian Bexty, our cameraman, videographer, and editor extraordinaire, Mocha, the man with the incredible hair. And what you and I, Sheila, what I propose we do is watch the debate.
Yep.
I think we'll generally be sort of quiet when that happens. If there's breaks, we can pipe in, but we'll watch it with the audience together. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what we saw and we'll take super chats. You're so good at explaining super chats. Do you want to tell our viewers what those are in case there's someone who hasn't done this with us before?
Sure. I love the super chats because I think it is the democracy of our network in action. It gives our viewers a chance to support the work that we do completely willingly, unlike what the CBC does to you. So everybody who's watching at home, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you'll see the live chat happening on the side. It's always very lively. There's a little community that's grown up around our live chats and our live streams. But what you can do, if you'd like to support the work that we do, because everybody's working late, we've got travel expenses incurred for Kian and Mocha to fly out to Saskatchewan today. There's a little dollar sign at the bottom of the live chat. You can click on that, and it allows you to throw some money our way. The more money you give us, the more characters you get. And what that will do is it will highlight your comment so everybody will see it. And Ezra and I will see it. And if we don't see it, then Mr. Producer Justin, who's working late, will send it to us in a message. And if you've got a question for us, now's your time to put it in a super chat. If you've got a comment, a compliment, sometimes people send me insults. Doesn't matter. If there's an issue you want to put on our radar, put it in a super chat. We'll see it and we'll read it. And unlike the mainstream media who take a bunch of money from Justin Trudeau, we don't turn the comments off. We want to see what you have to say and what interests you at home.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I like about the super chats is sometimes it turns into a little bit of one of those AMAs, ask me anything.
It sure does.
And I've got a rule of thumb that I will answer literally any question put to me. If someone's going to give me a few bucks, I mean, I'm not saying you're going to be delighted with the answer, and sometimes we've got so many super chats, the answer's not long. But I take pride in the fact that I do not ignore the super chats. And if you feel like super chatting throughout the debate, don't worry, we will not forget about those. As Sheila mentioned, Justin, our producer, will send those to us, so we will go back over them, even if we don't do so live. Now, I just spoke with Justin, our producer, before we sat down here, and he tells me that the debate is scheduled to start in 32 minutes, at 5 minutes past the hour, which is a very precise thing. And I understand it goes for 55 minutes. Is that right, Justin? So that's a pretty quick debate. I mean, this is not a 2-hour presidential thing. It's a 55-minute debate, and that includes time for the moderator. I'm looking forward to it. I like Saskatchewan. I haven't spent enough time there recently. That sure is rebel country. It won't surprise you to know I'm a fan of the Sask Party. I was a fan of it when Brad Wall was the premier. It took me a while to get to know Scott Moe a little bit. I like his style. Yep. Good fit for Saskatchewan. I like the fact that he stood alone against Justin Trudeau and Catherine McKenna and their carbon tax. I like the fact he not only ran Saskatchewan well, but he became sort of leader of the opposition during the interregnum there when Andrew Scheer was doing whatever he was doing. doing some dairy stuff or whatever. So I like the fact that Scott Moe was holding the fort. I love Saskatchewan people. I love the province. I think there's 100,000 lakes in Saskatchewan. I like the fact that it's a great turnaround story. That province was on decline when the NDP ran it. It had net out migration. They called it Red Square, but now it's the boomingest place. They love oil and gas. They love mining, whether it's potash or uranium. It is lots of fracking. The Keystone XL pipeline goes through it. So there's so much stuff cooking there. Obviously, agriculture. It is a great place, hardworking place. Frankly, we should be covering it some more. And I've been talking to a prospective reporter. I think I mentioned that to you, Sheila. So we may be joined in the weeks ahead by someone joining the Rebel team in Saskatchewan. So that's my way of saying, Saskatchewan, I love you. And why don't I take a break? And I've got, it's not a long debate tonight, so I don't need a lot of coffee, but I'm revving up. Sheila, why don't you give me your thoughts on the province that looks sort of like a rectangle?
As an Albertan, I feel great affinity for people in Saskatchewan. And, I'm grateful as an Albertan that Saskatchewan kept the fight alive against Justin Trudeau's carbon tax before Jason Kenney came into power here. And Scott Moe, facing a lot of pressure, really did stand alone against Justin Trudeau. And he did that, before he had other conservative allies. Doug Ford's another example of a guy who, at least at the time, was opposing Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. But it was Scott Moe who was alone in that. And, as an Albertan, this, there was so much out-migration from Saskatchewan during the time that the NDP were in power that, you would go to some Alberta communities and it felt like 1 in 3 people that you talked to were from Saskatchewan. And, when the NDP came into power here in Alberta, it was really people from Saskatchewan who were warning us, saying they say they're for healthcare, but they're going to do such a bad job that they'll end up closing hospitals, as was the case with NDP Premier Roy Romano. So, as an Albertan, to see Saskatchewan make such a rebound, it gives me hope that some of the damage that the NDP, along with Justin Trudeau, have done in Alberta, it gives me hope that it can be undone.
That's a great point. I remember when the Sask party almost won in its first round, but it lost, and then they switched leaders to Bradwell. And I thought, all the entrepreneurial Saskatchewan people are leaving for Alberta. So the folks that remain behind are public sector union people. So it was like it was becoming more and more concentrated leftist because all the swashbuckling entrepreneurial types were in Calgary, frankly. And it's no surprise that the Sask Party had its biggest fundraisers at that time in Calgary. I remember going to U of S, which is a really good school, and learning that, for example, in a class in their commerce grads or in their dental grads, good dental school, every single student but maybe one was leaving the province. So it has this good university, it's pouring all this money into training dentists or doctors or commerce grad, and then literally every single one of them, except for maybe one, says, see you later, I'm off to Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Vancouver. They were fleeing. That has been turned around. The culture of Saskatchewan has become more self-reliant, less socialist, less Tommy Douglas weird. And frankly, when I see Kristi Noem, the governor in South Dakota, I think that's that prairie spirit, freedom, hard work, resources. That's more the prairie vibe we got in Saskatchewan now, not the jealous, tear down your successful neighbor, Tommy Douglas vibe.
Well, and Saskatchewan has a problem that I think that that you see a lot across the prairies where, basically Regina controlled the whole place just because that's where the population center was, and it happened to be the government town too. So it would seem as though that this Tommy Douglas business was sort of the culture of Saskatchewan, but really it wasn't. It was isolated and concentrated in one place, and everyone else in the province remained the same bold, freedom-loving Westerners that we've always been. And it's good to see that that's back in power in Saskatchewan. I think, though, Saskatchewan, too, it's a good case study for comparative things. For example, you mentioned lots of fracking in Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan shares an oil field with North Dakota. And when North Dakota is booming because of Trump's policies, you can see that the same oil field just across the border is suffering because of Justin Trudeau's. And when the NDP were in power here, we sort of had a Lloydminster exclusion zone where NDP policies in Alberta really didn't apply in Saskatchewan because people on the Alberta side of that border city would suffer. People would just, if they didn't have this exclusion zone, people would just go across the border 1 block away into Saskatchewan and buy the cheaper, not NDP carbon taxed fuel.
Right. Just a reminder for folks who don't know the map, Lloydminster is this interesting city that straddles the border. So it's half on the Alberta side, half on the Sask side. And it's a world of difference sometimes. I remember, who was that? Jerry Ritz. I think he was from Lloydminster. He told me once that he proudly had a Saskatchewan phone number because he was toughing it out in the Saskatchewan side despite it being under socialist NDP. That was way back in the day. For a while there, then having the 306 area code was a point of pride because you weren't under the Alberta NDP. But that's a very interesting, that town itself is a case study in how people will move to get away from bullying governments. First they move west and east. I see some super chats are coming in. I'm just gonna start reading some. MVP looks like it's from Australia. I haven't been able to watch your daily show, so it's good to catch this live stream. Well, thank you very much. I guess, let me do the math here. I think it's 10:42 a.m. Thursday in Melbourne. I think I've been trying to get my time zones right because we talk with Avi Yamini, who's our chief Australia correspondent. He's just doing a great job down there, and we try and meet with him every day. It's tough to find the time where we're up and here he's up, but he's doing a great job. Let me read some more. Dylan Smith, thoughts on Bernier's bid for York Centre. MCGA, make Canada great again. I like Maxime Bernier, I like his ideas, but let me be very candid, and I'm not far away from Toronto, from York Centre. I don't know their riding intimately, but it's near where I am. And Maxime Bernier does not have roots there. He doesn't have a big team there. I saw some signs. Yesterday I was driving. I saw some signs up, but they were on public property. And good for him for getting signs and putting them up. But I'm going to make a prediction now, and this is not an insult, and this is not the way I want the world to be. I'm just telling you how I think the world is. I think he's going to get between 5 and 10% of the vote. And I think that that's just how it is. The PPC lost his seat, which I regret. And they didn't grow. I like a lot of the things they stand for, but I'm not sure if they are a political force on the partisan side anymore. Maybe he should set up a think tank or an advocacy group because I don't think he's going to win in that by-election. Those are my thoughts. What do you think, Sheila?
I think you're right. I think Parliament is always better when there are more voices pulling it to the right, but I just don't think that frankly, he's a parachuting candidate, isn't he? I mean, and as far as the Conservatives I know, we don't really care for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I'm not going to say I know that riding like the back of my hand, but it's community oriented. It's what's going on here. It's, I'm not bothered by his accent one bit. I like the French accent, but that's just another sign, you're from Quebec. And that's not an anti-Quebec thing. It's, there's a lot of people in that riding who are immigrants themselves. Not that Bernier would be an immigrant, but I'm saying it's just another signal that he's actually not from there.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it's going to go. I don't know the Conservative candidate, but I saw a fair number of the Conservative candidates' signs out So the Conservatives certainly aren't going to, and they have both a federal force and a provincial force. So I think they're going to come in a respectable second place. But I think the Liberals are going to win it. I see another super chat. It's 7:45 Eastern time. I'm keeping my eye on the clock there because in about 20 minutes' time that debate is supposed to start. Lamont Boucherville chips in $5. Sheila, do you want to read his super chat and give him a response?
Sure, definitely. I blame English Canada for losing their culture and heritage. Look at the Francophone communities in central Alberta like Legal or Beaumont. Yeah, that's one thing that people don't know a lot about Alberta. We do have some Francophone communities here. Beaumont, I think they still have the signs in French, like the stop signs in French in some places. But I don't think this is a matter of English Canada losing their culture. I don't think that English Canada has a monolith culture. I think there are different, distinct cultures within English Canada. I would say that what we have out here on the prairies is far different than the English Canadian culture in the East and in Toronto. I think it's completely different. I would say that English Canada out here is more closely related to, as Ezra pointed out, probably South Dakota, Montana, Idaho. I think those are more culturally compatible with the Western culture we have out here. So I don't think that English Canada lost their culture. I think there are just different cultures within English Canada, and that's why the country has a hard time staying together and liking each other sometimes.
You know, I mean, I've had the pleasure of being to 9 provinces and 2 territories, and I love it. I mean, go to Newfoundland, you want to talk friendly, holy macaroni.
Yeah.
Very different, Newfoundland, very different from Vancouver Island, very different from Anglo Montreal, from Oil Patch, Alberta to Fancy Pantsy, Bay Street, Toronto. I think America has even more diversity. I mean, compare New Orleans and Chicago and the Bronx and South Central LA and, you know, El Paso. You got an enormous diversity there too. But their system, I think, pushes the decision-making, the power down. I mean, in Canada, if you look at our Constitution, if there's ambiguity, the feds dominate. In the United States, we'll look at the name, the United States of America. Now, there was a whole civil war over whether or not those states could secede, but the primacy of the states and states' rights remains a powerful thing to this day. And I think the very fact that the locus of control in so many ways is at the state level, and you got 50 to choose from, that's a really competitive field. And you can say that's one of the things. Kristi Noem has a real laissez-faire approach to the COVID pandemic. You don't like it? Fine. Go check into a senior's home in Andrew Cuomo's New York state. So you got 50 choices there. In Canada, we have 10 provinces, 3 territories, but I think that the federal government does dominate in a way that it doesn't in the states. Those are just my thoughts on comparative politics. I see a chat from Mark Leselleur, if I'm saying that right. So glad to see Poilievre pushing for anti-corruption committee. Do you think he will accomplish his goal? Great question, great subject. I have some thoughts on it. Sheila, do you want to answer?
I don't see that super chat, Ezra.
Oh, sorry, it just popped up on my screen. It's $15 super chat. Thanks, Mark. I think Pierre has done a great job. In fact, when I think over the last 6 to 12 months, I can't think of another opposition MP who has done as well as him in any party. Charlie Angus did some good work on the WE file, but then his leader, Jagmeet Singh, said, okay, we'll cut a deal with you, Justin Trudeau. We'll give up on that whole WE thing. You and your family and the $500,000 they pocketed. We won't expose that, and we'll, there's a whole deal. So I think you would think that in a minority parliament where the opposition parties have a majority of the vote, you could set up an anti-corruption committee. You would think so. But that would be to take the NDP as anything more than Justin Trudeau's latest courtesan. And they will do whatever deal he wants them to do. Frankly, they're afraid of the election. Trudeau's moved so hard to the left. He could probably take even more seats away from the hapless Jagmeet Singh. And I got to tell you, I saw this new Green Party leader. I don't know her well at all. Never met her, really never heard of her before a week ago. Sober-minded, unlike Elizabeth May. Smart, in control of herself. Hard left-wing all down the line.
Yeah.
Identity politics all down the line. But you know what? If I was Jagmeet Singh, I would be very worried about the Green Party picking up a few votes. And I always thought Elizabeth May was just a stalking horse for the Liberals. I always thought she was just doing his dirty work for him. I predict, but I think this new Green Party leader really means business. Here's my prediction. I predict Elizabeth May will be given an appointment
for sure.
by Trudeau as Canada's ambassador to the, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change or whatever it's called. I believe she's going to get like a $300,000 a year, tax-free, monster expense account, huge jetting around the world deal to be like a full-time jet-setting eco-diplomat. That's my prediction. Give her her pension, really her great thank you. But I think this new Green Party leader is going to be a tough cookie who actually means what she says. She's not just a gimmick for the Liberals.
I think that Elizabeth May will probably end up as a Trudeau Foundation scholar. I've had my nose buried in Trudeau Foundation documents for the last 3 days, and that would be a comfortable soft landing for her. With the Liberals' attempts to block this anti-corruption committee, could you look more corrupt than when you are blocking an anti-corruption committee? I mean, in a sane world, excuse me, the Liberals would care about the optics of blocking an anti-corruption committee. I mean, that's what mobsters would do. But this is Canada, and the media is completely bought and paid for. And so, I don't know how the media would paint it. Maybe Justin Trudeau is trying to save parliamentary time and get down to the real business of governing by not wasting time with this anti-corruption committee. I mean, in a real country where we had and not to say that Canada is not a real country, but if we had real accountability from this government and media that tried to hold the government to account on behalf of the people, the Liberals would be absolutely raked across the coals for trying to block this, but they're just not.
Yeah. Could you imagine, like Donald Trump and his family, his sons are accused of cronyism. That family has probably lost $1 billion net worth because of politics. The Trump boys are centimillionaires in their own right. They basically campaign full-time. Daughter Ivanka helps dad out on some projects. Son-in-law Jared Kushner does some heavier lifting. I mean, my God, give the guy credit for the Middle East peace deal. The idea that they are doing this to make money is laughably absurd. Trump himself doesn't even take his salary.
Yep.
If you switched roles, if all of Trump's kids were pocketing monster checks from something like the We charity while steering gushers of cash to them, imagine that. Imagine if Trump was doing what the Trudeaus were doing, or imagine if they swapped media parties for a moment. If Trump had the lovey-dovey media that Trudeau has, and Trudeau had to answer the hecklers like Jim Acosta. It would be unbelievable. Now, I hear in my ear that our friend Kian Bexley on the ground in the Queen City of Regina has a little something to say. So let's roll that clip.
Hey there, Kian Bexley live on location at the Regina headquarters for the CBC, where the mainstream media consortium CBC, CTV, and Global News are hosting the two main party leaders in Saskatchewan for the debate, for the election debate. It's going to be an interesting night, not because of what's going to happen inside. We know that the mainstream media is just going to lob softballs at the NDP and try and grill Premier Scott Moe, so we figured we would wait outside because we're not allowed inside and ask some real questions, some questions that Saskatchewaners and all Canadians, especially Albertans, want to know the answer to. Now, the question that I'm going to ask the leader of the NDP has to do with comments made by one of his candidates regarding the oil sands, which she called the tar sands. They should be arriving here shortly. Our intel says that the leader of the NDP is going to be showing up first. We'll go to that right now. Hi, Ryan. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Do you stand by the comments your candidate made calling the oil sands tar sands and calling them a effing nightmare?
Hey, Steph.
Do you stand by those comments at all? And how can Saskatchewaners trust you? Well, it's a good thing we didn't go after that other guy who just walked in. There's so little fanfare when it comes to the NDP here in Saskatchewan. We weren't really sure we were actually looking at the leader of the opposition. That was him not responding to a question about what his candidate said. Conway was the name. Calling the oil sands, all of Western Canada, Canadian oil sands, a nightmare. And those comments, of course, are being ignored by him as he walks into the debate tonight. Scott Moe should be showing up here, I presume, maybe 15 minutes after the arrival. Premier, would you be able to comment on the comments made by an NDP candidate calling the oil sands an effing nightmare?
You know what, we're here this evening for a cordial debate. We're going to present the people of this province with a very, very clear choice for the future of our province. Okay, thanks.
And there you have it. At least Scott Moe answered the question, appearing much more statesmanlike than his opponent. They're going into the debate now, and the debate should last a couple of hours, and it should be quite lively. Back to you, Sheila and Ezra.
Well, that's a great little report from Kian, and I have to say, the fall colors look great on our little ginger.
I was going to say that's a great pea coat he's got there. It looks amazing on him.
Listen, I'm calling her out. I shouldn't call him a little ginger. Kian Bexty is pound for pound the toughest investigative journalist in Canada. I like having fun with him. We joke around. But all kidding aside, he's a hell of a journalist. And in that moment there, he did more accountability journalism than the CBC in that province has done in the entire campaign. I have fun with him. I rib him a little bit. But we're actually very proud of the work he does in investigative journalism and accountability journalism.
Well, did you see that right there? I mean, everybody knew, and I say everybody, I the puzzler. Justin whispered in my ear that it's like a puzzle. Everybody in the media knew that that's where the NDP and Scott Moe were coming in. Where were they? Mm-hmm. Why does Kian Bexty have to fly in from Calgary to do the work that the mainstream media in Regina and in the rest of Saskatchewan should be doing? It's not like Kian had to fight to get to the NDP leader. He just walked up there was no one there. There's a few videographers, meaning the media knew exactly where they would be. So where are the journalists? Where were the journalists there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, first of all, the journalists agree with the NDP that the oil sands should be locked down. The journalists agree with the NDP that pipelines are bad. And even if they didn't agree with the NDP, they're paid by Justin Trudeau. The CBC is paid outright by Trudeau, $1.5 billion a year. And all the print media in that town, the Regina Leader Post, is owned by Post Media, which gets $140,000 a week from Trudeau. So when you are paid by Justin Trudeau, who despises the West, despises oil and gas, despises Saskatchewan, it's tough to stand up to Trudeau or his ideology. So, I'm not surprised. I'm, as always, disappointed in the mainstream media, but I'm not surprised that the Kian's the only one showing initiative.
No, I mean, and if the mainstream media wants Rebel News to go away, well, start doing your darn job because they don't do their job, and there's a big black hole to be filled in accountability journalism, and we're happy to do it. We're happy to fly in a reporter all the way from Calgary to do the job that they should be doing on the ground. It's funny you mentioned the Regina Leader Post, because as I was doing a little research to prep myself for things to talk about today, they did one of those Republicans pounce hit pieces on the Saskatchewan party. Instead of us framing a story that an NDP candidate is exposed as an anti-oil wackadoo, their headline read, Saskatchewan party assails NDP candidate for extreme anti-oil comment, and anti-oil is in scare quotes. So, you can see that this is how the journalists on the ground feel about the NDP and oil and gas. They're pretty in the bag for the NDP. They're putting anti-oil in scare quotes as though it's not actually who and what she is. That's the reason Keean is the only guy trying to catch those politicians on the way in, because of the leader post. Just that right there. They proved their own bias. They confirmed my own bias against them.
Well, Sheila, if you and I keep praising Keean like this, the lad's going to ask for a raise. So I think
no, don't do that.
Robert Hartley chips in 5 smackers. Yeshua HaMashiach is Adonai. Well, I know enough Hebrew to translate that. Jesus, the Messiah, is Lord. So thank you for the super chats. I think we've caught up on the super chats. Is that right, Justin?
No, we missed one from Black Shirt and Jeans. Did we get to that? Thoughts on the new Maverick Party?
Oh, no, I didn't see that. Why don't you jump in?
Sure. So the Maverick Party, for those of you who don't know, are a rebrand of the Wexit Party. They changed their name to the Maverick Party after consulting with members. I'm not sure how vast and how deep those consultations were, because I think a lot of people were sort of like, what the heck's the Maverick Party and where did that come from? I'm happy to see a rebrand away from Wexit, but I'm not sure Maverick is the right name for it. And Jay Hill, former Conservative MP for Northern British Columbia, not even Alberta, remains the interim leader of that party. So, I am hopeful, but I haven't seen great ground game from them either. Yeah,
when I hear the Wexit Party, I keep thinking Wascally Wabbit. But but Maverick is, when I hear Maverick, I know a Maverick is a kind of, I think it's cattle that just don't go where it's supposed to go, like it breaks from the herd, which I like that. I also think of Top Gun, the movie, and one of them might be Maverick. But maybe
who are
in
we
time,
to talk? We're Rebel News. We're Rebel News.
Yeah, maybe in time it'll acquire meaning. We're nitpicking the name. Let's see what the action is. I see one more super chat, or a couple more. Lisa Proust says, just 2. The first is $5. Thank you, Lisa. Sheila, sorry for being absent in the past days. I miss you and David beyond words. Holy moly, I never get comments like that, Sheila. Thank you, Ezra, for creating Rebel News. I love all your work. Well, that's pretty friendly, too.
Yeah.
And Lisa Proust again, Keean was why I found Rebel News via Roxham Road. Well, I want to tell you that, and I said this at our staff meeting the other day, I feel that pound for pound, person for person, dollar for dollar, I think we fight for freedom harder than anyone in the world. Now, obviously not soldiers who give their actual lives to fighting actual wars, but I mean fighting in the nonviolent and the political journalistic theater is what I mean. Breitbart is an outstanding American institution. The New York Post is fighting hard right now, but I think that we fight, and I say this not to praise myself, but in answer to your tweet, to your comment, Lisa, about our team. And I'm so proud to see our team grow. If you look at our Facebook or YouTube headers, you can see the glorious team, new teammates joining all the time, new teammates. Drea Humphrey out there in Vancouver. Tamara Ugolini out there in Coburg. Avi Yamini way down under in Melbourne, just to name a few. Andrew Chapados right here in Toronto, providing another point of view. We haven't really had Mocha on TV. He did one live stream. And we have another gent here who I think might have recorded his first video today. Did Ben record his first video today? Ben Bankus, so we'll see that. I haven't seen that. I'm terrified now that I realize that.
Me too. I saw the script and it is spicy. It's going to need a warning in front of it.
Okay, well, I look forward to seeing that. Lisa Proust, Ezra, $2. Ezra, you made me feel bad. I miss you beyond words. Well, Lisa, you're overdoing it, but I thank you for overdoing it. And I'm glad that, you know what, I said this on my own live stream the other day, and Hey, Justin, you tell me when to cork it, because I know we're coming really close to the start now. I was talking to Jeff Fillion, who's a great radio host in Quebec City, and they're really facing a lot of censorship from politicians out there. And he was down in the dumps. I said, no, don't do that. Because everyone needs to see you so they can feel like they're not alone. Everyone needs to see, he's such a lighthouse. He stands up brightly in the dark. And everyone else has a little candle. I said, Jeff, you got to stay there because everyone else looks to you for encouragement. And maybe he needs encouragement sometime. So one of the things I feel we do at Rebel News is we tell people you are not alone. When we have 1.4 million subscribers on our YouTube channel, that tells you you are not alone. You are not crazy. When they try to gaslight you, when they try and tell you, no, you're the crazy one, we're the sane ones, you can say, well, I got 1.4 million friends who disagree with you and agree with me, so you can feel a sense of community. Not everyone is as passionate about the sense of community as Lisa Proust is. We're very grateful for that. But on the other hand, imagine paying 24 salaries simply from the voluntary generosity of viewers. So that suggests there are actually quite a few people like Lisa Proust, maybe who don't volubly send us as much affection, but financially do. We pay 24 salaries from the goodwill of our viewers. The CBC can't say that, can they?
Well, and I make this point a lot, but I don't think I can make this point enough. The people on this team who work with us, I think we're starting, so I'll have to finish that thought later.
Across the province and the country. I think it's time to meet our two debaters who are facing off tonight. Scott Moe is the leader of the Sask Party. Ryan Miley is the leader of the NDP. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Molly.
I also want to welcome our panelists posing questions to the leaders tonight. First off, we have Leader Post and Star Phoenix columnist Murray Mandrick. Vanier scholar, former journalist, and First Nations University lecturer Morel de Fiddler. Global News reporter Alison Bamford, and CBC's provincial affairs reporter Adam Hunter. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this debate is coming to you from Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and homeland of the Métis. Let's get to the rules. Each leader tonight will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. After that, we will go to a reporter question. Leaders will then have 45 seconds to respond uninterrupted. Then we will open the floor for 3 minutes of debate on that same topic. Now, I can interject leaders to keep us on track, but when you hear this sound, the open debate is over. Now, I don't want to cut any of you off, but I will do it if I have to. At the end of the night, each leader will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Leaders, there is a countdown clock in this studio. Can we both see it?
Yes.
Okay, can we promise to stay on track and on time?
Promise.
Let's do it.
Okay, and I just want to let everyone know I have this handy fly swatter. If anything comes our way, we're prepared.
Fabulous.
Okay. Earlier, we held a random draw to decide who would kick us off tonight, and that lucky winner was you, Mr. Moe. You have the first 2 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Molly, and welcome Saskatchewan this evening. I want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you to everyone in Saskatchewan for everything that you have done to control the spread of COVID-19. Thanks to you, we are doing okay. In fact, we are doing a lot better than many other places, both in terms of controlling the virus and in recovering our economy. More people were able to continue working safely here in Saskatchewan than in any other province in Canada. And today, Saskatchewan has the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. But the pandemic is not over, and the recovery is not over. So the question this election is, who do you trust to lead Saskatchewan's economic recovery? The Saskatchewan Party has a plan for a strong recovery that makes life more affordable for everyone. We'll introduce a new tax credit that will save up to $2,100 on your home renovations. We'll help families with the costs of their kids' sports and other activities. We'll help students by increasing the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship. And we'll help seniors by increasing the Seniors Income Plan. And we'll give everyone a break by cutting your power bill by 10%. All within a plan to balance our budget by the year 2024, which is something you will not hear from the NDP. Tonight is a chance for us to compare our plans, a chance for us to compare our records. We all remember the NDP's record of decline. They're a risk we can't afford. The Saskatchewan Party has a plan for a strong recovery and a strong Saskatchewan. It's a plan for a strong economy, strong communities, and strong families. I look forward to discussing our plan here this evening, and I once again thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Moe. Mr. Miley, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks to our panelists. Thank you, Mr. Moe. And thanks everyone who's tuning in tonight. For me, this election is all about you. It's about us, the choice before us as a province. And it's a choice between Mr. Moe's plan for cuts that will slow down the economy and hurt people, or our plan to invest now, get our economy moving again, and help people out in this difficult time. Because we know that even before the pandemic, folks were having a harder time here in Saskatchewan. People like the pipe fitter I was talking to the other day, who said how sick and tired he is of seeing license plates from Alberta and Texas on the way to the job site while he sits out of work. Or the patients who are waiting in pain for the surgery they need as they see wait times that grow and grow and grow. Or the thousands of parents who wrestled anxiously with the decision of whether or not to send their kids back to school in already overcrowded classrooms in the middle of a pandemic. These are the people. And this is the reason I'm running to be your premier. They shouldn't have to settle. And we don't have to settle. We can do so much better. We can. Instead of sending jobs away, we can create jobs right here. Instead of overcrowded classrooms, we can help kids with the teachers and EAs they need to thrive in school. Instead of cuts and wait times, we can make sure, as we invest, that every patient gets the care they need when and where they need it. This is the choice, and it's such a crucial moment for our province. The choices we make today matter more than ever. This is our chance to finally put people first.
Thank you, leaders. Well, let's put you on the hot seat with our first question. CBC's provincial affairs reporter Adam Hunter, over to you.
Thanks, Molly. We have 165 new cases of COVID-19 over the past 5 days, 254 active cases right now in the province. My question is, what should or will government do to prevent the spread of COVID-19? And would this include an indoor mandatory mask rule?
Mr. Moe, you have 45 seconds.
Well, first, I'd like to start by thanking Saskatchewan people for the efforts that they have made as individuals that has led us to the collective success and the low case numbers that we have here in the province. Our total case numbers in Saskatchewan are 62% below the national average. Our total active cases today even are 60% below the national average, and thankfully, our fatalities are 92% below the national average. We have safely reopened our economy, our communities. We have safely reopened our schools here in the province. As we move forward, and we saw Dr. Shahab out the other day where he has reduced private gathering sizes to 15. But where we have had challenges is when people are not following the public health advice that is in place. Thankfully, the vast majority of Saskatchewan people are, and that's showing up in their numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Moe. Mr. Miley, 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. You know, I'm getting pretty tired of COVID-19. And I bet I'm not the only one. This isn't the year that we had in mind. And yet people have stepped up so incredibly well across Saskatchewan. And they deserve a government that will step up for them as well. That means with clear guidance on when to use masks, how to protect ourselves. It also means not going down the road that Mr. Moe has in mind with his austerity plan of cuts. That's the worst idea right now. Now is the time for us to invest. Get people back on the job, invest in health and education, make the investments now that keep us safe and allow us to get our economy moving and help people out in this difficult time.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Okay, it's time for our first open debate of the night on the same topic. What measures should be taken by the government to prevent COVID-19, and would you put in a mandatory mask ban?
With respect to the masking policy in the province, we've been clear since day one. When you are able to create that physical distance, like we are here this evening, a mask is not necessary. When you are not able to have that physical distance, you should have a mask with you. I carry one with me all of the time, and you should then wear that mask. We've been very clear on the masking policy that we have had in this province province. It has been effective, and it will continue for the foreseeable future.
Well, Mr. Moe, there has been a fair amount of mixed messages. At times you've been offside even with the chief medical health officer. One of the things that I was really disappointed was the failure to speak out about the folks who are protesting in the anti-mask movement and really make it clear that that's not helpful. But the bigger concern for me, and you referenced it today, which I think is really important, we saw the recommendation that we decrease gatherings from 30 to 15 people. Well,
those are private gatherings.
Yeah, let's talk about schools. Let's talk about classrooms. Yeah. We have classrooms of 30, 35, 40 kids. You have
that's not
never
what the
been
recommendation was, Ms. Molly.
Yes, but you've never been willing to address the overcrowded class sizes. Do you admit that we have a problem with the number of kids in our classes?
As we're going to come to the class sizes, we have that in an education segment. I want to know about the masks. Mr. Miley, would you put in a mandatory mask policy?
Now, one of the things that's been missing is clear guidance. Where should people use them, and what are the thresholds? And this is what has been frustrating for folks in public health as well as in the general public.
The threshold is 2 meters.
No, the threshold of what number of cases, what rate of transmission, when would you introduce mandatory masks? But, you know, when we're talking about what's the biggest risk right now, we're talking about gatherings, and class sizes are very germane to this conversation.
So, Mr. Moe, what is that threshold?
The threshold to when you should wear a mask is when you're not.
But when, in terms of implementing a mandatory mask policy, it's something that the city mayors have asked for.
We have a very clear masking policy in this province that is there today. If you're able to create that physical distance, a mask is not required. If you're able to create that 2 meters of physical distance, a mask is not required. The second part of the question, Adam, was with respect to the supports. The supports that we have provided to the small business community with a grant to our small business community. We've provided supports as well to the tourism and accommodation community. We have provided supports to a buy local initiative here in the province to support our small businesses in community after community. And as we move forward, there are not going to be cuts outside of the cuts to the power rates, outside of the cuts to people's taxes, and outside of the cuts to what families are spending in the way of raising their kids.
When you were asked the other day at your platform launch whether you would rule out cuts, you were asked 5 times. And 5 times you refused to do it.
There will be no cuts, Mr. Miley. We will be cutting power rates. We will be cutting taxes.
That the road ahead is austerity. And why would anyone believe you when we saw what happened in 2017? A government that had promised no cuts, promised not to touch the crowns, instead sold off, got rid of STC.
We're not selling crowns. The cuts that we have will be in the way of families' power rates.
You heard the bell. We're going to keep talking about the economy. Adam, your second question.
You led right into my next question. You both mentioned your plans in your opening statements. You're getting into the economic recovery. What specific steps are you going to take to help the economy recover through the pandemic?
Mr. Miley, 45 seconds.
Thanks for the question, Adam. We know that even before the pandemic, folks in Saskatchewan were having a hard time making ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck. We were leading the country already in the number of people having to walk away from their mortgages, leading the country in the number of people having to declare bankruptcy. These are our friends and neighbors. These are folks across the province who are struggling. When I asked Mr. Moe about that recession in the legislature, he said that it was news to him. Well, it's sure not news to the struggling families across Saskatchewan who are looking not for cuts. They're looking for a government that will invest now. Invest now in creating jobs right here with Sask First Procurement, in raising wages and doing the work to make life more affordable and showing that they actually understand where people are at right now and how much some folks are struggling today.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Mr. Moe, 45 seconds.
The economy in Saskatchewan, we do have a plan for recovery. It's a plan to invest in infrastructure where we have provided a $2 billion booster shot to an already large infrastructure plan in the province, $7.5 billion to build schools, to build hospitals, to build our roads across the province. We have a plan for a strong recovery that includes balancing the budget by 2024. Very important that we get back to a balanced budget here in the province so that we have the ability for sustainable health funding, for sustainable education funding, so that we can ensure that that funding is sustainable for not just today's generation, but so that we can have schools and healthcare for generations of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Moe. Time for your open debate on the same topic. How do we help our economy recover?
As I said earlier, we have a strong plan for recovery. The Saskatchewan Party has a strong plan for recovery. And as our economy recovers, so will the province's finances. That's why we have put forward a plan to balance the budget by 2024. Mr. Miley has no plan to balance the budget at all. He has a plan to make a plan to balance the budget. He has put forward a $2.7 billion costed plan. We had to cost our plan. I didn't think that we were going to have to cost the opposition's plan, but we did. And there's an additional $4 billion that Mr. Miley has not come forward with in his plan, $4 billion in unaccounted spending. And the question that I have is how do you think Mr. Miley is going to pay for it? And the answer I would give is that he isn't. Saskatchewan people are.
So this is the message that we hear over and over from Mr. Moe. When we talk about the investments we want to make, he tells us that we can't afford them. What is he really saying? He's telling the people of Saskatchewan that we can't afford childcare, that we can't afford to not have overcrowded classrooms, that we don't deserve high-quality healthcare. Well, I think he's wrong. I think we do deserve it and that we are worth it. What we can't afford is 4 more years of Scott Moe and the Sask Party, 4 more years of cuts, 4 more years of privatization, 4 more years of backroom deals for the Old Boys Club while ordinary families are struggling across Saskatchewan. Mr. Moe may be satisfied, but the people of the province certainly aren't.
$4 billion in deficit spending, above the $2.7 billion that has been costed out by the NDP. It's available on our website, saskparty.com. We've itemized the items that were not included in the NDP platform. It's $4 billion that will ensure that the NDP certainly has no plan to balance the budget. Their plan to make a plan to balance the budget will be stretched out, and it is going to result in higher taxes for Saskatchewan people.
Well,
Mr. Miley,
Moe,
is there a timeline? Is there a timeline in terms of balancing the budget with the NDP's spending plans?
we're going to balance the budget as soon as we're able, but we're not going to do it in a way that's going to hurt families, and that's the biggest difference. I know that the people across the province, they want to see wise fiscal management, but the deficits that the people I'm talking to are most concerned about are the deficits in our schools, the deficits in our hospitals, the deficits in the bank accounts of ordinary families. And Mr. Moe's plan for cuts to health and education, that's a bad idea anytime. But right now, it's downright dangerous. It'll choke our economy and it'll hurt people. It's the wrong approach.
This is the NDP record of not balancing the budget in Saskatchewan. This is the NDP
Mr. Moe,
record,
have you
and
ever balanced a budget?
this is why it matters. This is why this record matters. We're going to speak about this record here this evening. When I graduated high school in the early 90s, many of my friends had to leave the province. They weren't able to come back. They're coming back now, many of them. But they had to leave the province because of the NDP had the dead last job creation record
Mr. Moe,
in the
while
nation.
You're, talking about
and we deserve better. I deserve better for my children. They need an opportunity to work in a community here in Saskatchewan, and so do yours.
Every single project Mr. Moe builds is a company from out of country, out of
Mr.
province.
Miley. We're still talking about the economy. Don't worry, I'll give you a chance to jump in. We'll go next to Murray Mandrick, political columnist for the Leader Post and Star Phoenix. Murray.
Thanks, Molly. Both of your parties are promising hundreds of millions of dollars in spending and rebates. We're looking at a situation where there's a $2.1 billion deficit this year and accumulated $24 billion deficit that we're going to have to pay back. Please tell the folks out there, how is this responsible governance?
Mr. Moe.
Saskatchewan has a plan to balance the budget here in the province. We have a plan to foster the economic recovery that Saskatchewan is already underway in our province. We didn't wait for the post-COVID environment. We were able to reopen our economy with a solid Reopen Saskatchewan plan. We were able to reopen our communities. We were able to, yes, reopen our schools, and we were able to do so safely and keep our COVID transmission rates very low. We have a plan to balance the budget in 2024 for all of the reasons that you had mentioned, Murray. It is important for us to balance the budget so that we can have that sustainable ability to invest in schools, to invest in hospitals, to make all of the investments that we have made over the course of the last 10 years to ensure that is sustainable for generations to come. We have a plan and we're going to stick to it.
Thank you, Mr. Moe. Mr. Miley.
Thank you very much. We have seen debt climb under the Sask Party, making it more difficult for us to make the investments, but now would be the worst possible time for us to cut. And this is the road that Mr. Moe has told us he's going down. Austerity is the word his finance minister used. We saw that in 2017. In 2017, after having promised that there would be no cuts, that the crowns were safe, they killed off STC. They had dozens of meetings to sell SaskTel and SGI, and they cut deeply in healthcare and education, $54 million out of our classrooms. So mark my words. He may be saying one thing today, that if re-elected, we will see austerity, we will see cuts, and that will hurt our economy and make it harder for for us to reach balance.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's open the debate. We're talking about the rebates. Why are the rebates the best way to move forward for both your parties? You both have rebates.
To foster the economic recovery here in the province, that is well underway. You are going to see cuts to your power bill. You are going to see cuts to your taxes. You are not going to see the sale of any crowns here in the province under a Saskatchewan Party government. What you are going to see is an investment in the affordability for our families, an investment in the recovery of our economy. We're going to get back to the days where we have been for over a decade now of having the second best job creation rate in this nation. This is the opportunity that Saskatchewan has ahead of it on the backside of this COVID-19 virus. What would challenge that opportunity is a plan to make a plan about balancing the budget at some point in the future with $4 billion in unaccounted spending. That is the challenge that Mr. Miley has.
Let's talk for a moment about those jobs. Every single time the Sask Party moves forward with a public project, they manage to send it to a company from Alberta, from Texas, from China, from Tokyo, from England, a $2 billion road around this city built by a company from France. That's wrong. We have the people right here in Saskatchewan who are unemployed.
That's not the case.
Unemployed and ready to get to work. When we're building our roads, our hospitals, our schools, our power plants, we're building them with our dollars. Why, Mr. Moe, can you never manage to make sure that work is done by our companies and our workers?
The road, the bypass around the city had over 70% Saskatchewan content on the people that were working on that. There was companies like Broda Construction out of Prince Albert that had a camp outside of the city here building that road. Graham Construction, a Saskatchewan company, a Saskatchewan-based company that built the Saskatchewan Hospital in North Battleford. We had Graham Construction building the hospital in Jim Pattison Children's Hospital.
Mr. Moe?
Pardon me?
It was a company from England that built that hospital. It went bankrupt because of the P3 model.
It was Graham Construction.
And this is where the question
the
remains.
The fact of the
Mr.
matter
Moe.
is that this is the record of investment in infrastructure by this government is solid. We have invested billions of dollars in schools and hospitals and roads, unlike the record of the NDP, who closed 176 schools, closed a school a month the entire time they were in government.
So the question remains, Mr. Moe,
across the
of
province.
the major projects in this country,
there's no Saskatchewan people working on a project
Mr. Moe, let's hear
when
Mr.
you
Miley
close the
respond.
hospital or when you close the
Let's hear Mr. Miley respond.
Mr. Moe, the question remains, why do you think that Saskatchewan workers wouldn't be able to build a road around Regina?
They did.
Every single time you managed to send these jobs away. The power plant in Swift Current, less than half of the workers were from Saskatchewan.
That's
the power
not
plant in
correct.
Swift Current, only 20% of the money stayed in the province. Why do you not think Saskatchewan workers are fit for the job? Why do you insist on, instead of stimulating our economy, stimulating the economies of France?
Gentlemen, we have 20
Texas,
seconds. I want to
and
get
Alberta?
this in because we're talking about the rebates. Given the enormity of the COVID situation, given the fact that we have no vaccine and we don't know it's very uncertain the future, is Saskatchewan voters going to expect rebates for years from both of your parties?
This is why
It's
it was
time to
important.
make sure we support people. It really is not a time to let people go.
This is why it was important for us to reopen the economy and reopen safely, is to ensure that we could get Saskatchewan people back to work.
Okay, Murray, we are coming back to you for question number 2.
Our core industries like agriculture, oil, mining are certainly changing. But the question becomes, what do we do to help them in this new environment that we're in? And what do we do to encourage and bring to this province more sustainable industries in the future that maybe are going to be less susceptible to markets?
Mr. Miley, 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. We know that workers in oil and gas, in potash, and other key sectors in our province have been hurt, especially with the downturn in prices during COVID-19. Lots of people are struggling. We need to be there to support those essential industries. We also need to not limit our opportunities. We saw under Mr. Moe the killing of the solar industry when they got rid of net metering. We've seen the Sask Party kill off film. Right now, we have incredible opportunities. We have the best opportunity for solar energy, for wind, anywhere in the nation. We should be leading the way with geothermal, with solar, bringing back a film industry, creating all the opportunities for a diversified, more resilient economy, instead of sending those jobs away, as Mr. Moe has done.
Mr. Moe.
You're exactly right, Murray. Food, fuel, and fertilizer is a way that Saskatchewan has created wealth for generations now. And those industries, plus some additional industries as we move forward, will continue to be the very basis of the Saskatchewan economy. That's why we have set targets in our plan for growth, targets of increasing our exports by up to 50%. And this is why this recipe has been working of adding value to these products. We have the lowest lowest unemployment rate in Canada today, have now for 2 months. We have had the second highest job creation rate now for 13 years in the nation. This is a record that we are very proud of. It's a record of where we have had private industry invest in mining. The most sustainable mining projects in potash and uranium in the world, most sustainable agricultural investment, as well as the energy investment that is among the most sustainable in the world.
That is your time. Open debate. How do we make Saskatchewan more sustainable?
Well, you know, earlier we were talking about some numbers, and Mr. Moe was making up some new ones. But there's one number that I think we can't avoid,
on our internet.
and we
You can see
have
it
to
there.
agree on.
It's on our website.
That number is 13 cents. That's how much we saw the minimum wage go up just the other day, leaving us still with the lowest minimum wage in the entire country. And, you know, these are the folks on the front lines, the folks in our grocery stores, the folks in our pharmacies and our gas stations, the people we've all thanked. Thank you so much for stepping up for us. These services are essential. Mr. Moe has thanked them as well, but what kind of thanks is a 13-cent raise? Why does Mr. Moe think the workers in Saskatchewan are worth less for their labor than folks in Alberta, in British Columbia, in New Brunswick? Why do you not think they're worth it, Mr. Moe?
In Saskatchewan, we have taken 112,000 people off the tax rolls. We have very much focused on the affordability for families in this province. A family of four in Saskatchewan today pays absolutely no income tax on their first $51,675 of earned income. This is one of the highest tax-free thresholds in the nation. Personal and child spousal exemptions have increased at twice the rate in the last decade. We are very proud of the investments that we have made in the affordability for families, in particular, taking low-income families off the tax roll altogether.
So the question, Mr. Moe,
the jobs that are available in our communities are in agriculture, they're in energy, they're export-related jobs. And my question to you is the industries that are either not directly involved in exporting are involved in servicing those export-related jobs. We need to, as leaders, support those industries, some of the most sustainable industries in the world. You yourself have not supported those industries. And you have a candidate that is an anti-oil candidate that is also not supporting those industries.
Mr. Moe, the thing you've been most successful at exporting is Saskatchewan jobs.
No, that's not actually what the statistics say.
And when it comes to the minimum wage in this province, we have people who are working full-time, hardworking folks who've stepped up during the pandemic and shown incredible leadership. And yet, what have they been shown from this government? A 13-cent raise. Still the lowest minimum wage in the entire country. We've got people working full-time and having to stop by the food bank on the way home. So the question remains, Mr. Moe, why do you think that Saskatchewan workers deserve the lowest minimum wage in the entire country? Are you proud that that's our record?
The record of Saskatchewan, and this is the facts, the record of the Saskatchewan is that we have had the third highest economic growth rate from 2007 to 2019. Our population has increased by 170,000 people in communities right across this province. We've had the second highest job creation record relative to under the NDP. We were dead last in the nation, dead last in the nation.
Do you really believe that 13 cents?
Just today, we have the lowest unemployment rate in the nation of Canada. This is due to what you have done as Saskatchewan people. You have stopped the spread. You have slowed the spread of COVID-19 in our communities.
Thank you,
You have
gentlemen.
allowed us to open our economy and get back to work.
Thank you, gentlemen. That's all the time we have for that segment. Let's turn now to Vanier scholar, former journalist, and First Nations University lecturer, Merelda Fiddler. Merelda.
First of all, thank you, gentlemen. As a Métis woman, though, in this province, I see many missed opportunities to build strong and mutually beneficial relationships with Indigenous people. If you become our next premier and you really want to put people first and build strong communities, what is one thing that you would do personally to show us you intend to build those stronger relationships with Indigenous people?
Mr. Moe.
When we talk about a recovery in our communities, whether they be Indigenous communities or otherwise, we mean a strong recovery for absolutely everyone. So one thing that I would commit to and have worked on already, but will continue to work on, is the engagement of our Indigenous communities in our forestry industry. I have seen the success of that. I've brought the premiers out for the first time to meet in an Indigenous community in Big River First Nation, where we met and we heard stories of how that community has used an agreement with the provincial government for a forest management area. They have used the profits from that agreement. They have invested those profits in the Darby Morin Centre of Excellence, the Darby Morin Education Centre, to ensure that they are able to offer education to their children, to that next generation, so that they have every opportunity to succeed. A win-win-win needs to be expanded.
That is your time. Mr. Miley.
Thank you for that question, Merelda. It's extremely important. For Saskatchewan people, there's a core value that everyone should have a chance to succeed here, to have a great life. And yet working with First Nations and Métis communities in the north, in inner city Saskatoon, I've seen the barriers firsthand and how that results in worse health outcomes, in tougher time getting work. And it holds not just First Nations and Métis people back, but it holds us all back. That costs the entire province. What we need is a government that isn't going to pass the buck and say that that's someone else's problem, that is actually going to want to do the work. And that's my commitment, is to work with First Nations leaders, federal government, to close the gaps in healthcare, in education, in justice, and employment, so that Saskatchewan value of everyone having a chance is something we achieve.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. I can see my colleague wanting to get in on one more before the open debate. Let's get to that question.
Sure.
I'm wondering, as you start to build these relationships and create these policies, what role do the Indigenous people within your own parties play in helping you design these things?
3 minutes.
Thank you for that question. That's really important, and we've been really lucky. I've got to work with Buckley Belanger, who's our MLA for Athabasca, and Doyle Vermette for Cumberland. We have several candidates, First Nations and Métis candidates, running for us this time. That helps so much to have those folks around the table and in the legislature. And I'm recalled to an experience just not that many weeks ago, where Doyle Vermette, MLA for Cumberland, Métis man himself, he spoke up about what he's seen in his community, about the number of funerals he's had to attend, the number of families he's had to console or counsel, folks who were talking about taking their lives at a time when we are leading the country in the number of people who are dying by suicide. And he gave an amazing speech in the legislature to support his bill for suicide prevention about those experiences. And I watched the Premier watch that speech, and his colleagues on the other side as well, with their hearts in their eyes. And I hoped for a moment that maybe, just for once, they would actually vote with us for something like that. But instead, they voted, 44 of them, every single one have voted against a legislated suicide prevention strategy. And so I have a question for Mr. Moe. Why did you vote against that important bill brought forward by a Métis MLA?
Legislation is not required to work on something as important as suicides. You know very well, Mr. Miley, that we have our Pillars for Life strategy in place. That Pillars for Life strategy is working, is guiding us through the conversation around how we are engaging with our partners across the province on a very important conversation, one around suicides, and in particular, yes, northern suicides. We most recently signed a letter of commitment with the FSI and with the federal government. Both need to be partners in this conversation to build on that very direction that we had in the Pillars for Life. On the question of engagement within our party and engagement with community leaders across the province, Indigenous community leaders at all levels. That engagement is not a new is not a new engagement. That engagement has been going on, and it needs to continue into the future. I'd look back to the conversation we had not only at the Big River First Nation, but the conversations that we've had at the tribal council level on our 18 partnerships when it comes to child and family services. Now working on the implementation of Bill C-92 to ensure that our children are taken care of and taken care of in their community.
Can I ask about the Pillars of Life? You said that it's working. I mean, I looked at the statistics. There's been 1,000 people that have lost their lives over the last 5 years, many young people, many Indigenous. Right. It's larger than the first half of the decade. So how do we measure success when we're dealing with people's lives?
Well, I'd quote, and I don't do this often, but I'd quote, John Horgan last night, who talked about, this is going to take us some time to work our way through this conversation, but we are going to need everyone at the table to find our way through that conversation. The Pillars of Life strategy is an important strategy as it guides that conversation. It's supported by the Canadian Mental Health Association, but more work to do from all sides on this conversation.
It's a very sensitive issue. We're going to go back to Merelda. She has another question that maybe touches on that.
I do. Both parties have talked about job creation and engaging Indigenous people in all of this job creation. But when we look at statistics like Indigenous women are 12 times more likely to go missing or be murdered, or when we look at incarceration rates in our province of 75% Indigenous people, and we factor in that 3 times the national average for Indigenous suicides versus non-Indigenous suicide, how do you connect those with your job creation strategy? Where do you start? What's that starting point for you?
Mr. Miley, 45 seconds.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's exactly there that we need to look. If we're asking the question, are we getting this right? It's the outcomes that will tell us. 60% of kids on reserve in Saskatchewan are living in poverty. A quarter of kids in the province as a whole living in poverty. Clearly, the approach that Mr. Moe has taken so far, it isn't working. We're not closing that gap. And that's why I would make that commitment, that annually we'll release a Closing the Gap report that fully outlines the work done and the true statistics on health, on employment, on education, on justice, and we'll use that. And a speech in the legislature where we will highlight this as a top priority and allow this government to work as a facilitator instead of a barrier, as we've seen under Mr. Moe.
Thank you, Mr. Malley. That is your time. Mr. Moe, 45 seconds.
The conversation has to happen at the very local level, and it is occurring. And yes, the supports need to be there, whether it be conversations around how we support young women in our Indigenous communities and in other communities, how we support those that are struggling with mental health challenges, maybe addictions challenges. And so there is a holistic conversation leading to investment that needs to occur, and it needs to occur in conjunction with our Indigenous communities. It also is going to require us putting our foot forward and investing alongside, as we did in the forest management agreements that I mentioned earlier. Most recently, we have also put forward investment in the energy industry with Project Reconciliation, an Indigenous-owned energy company looking to purchase some of the TMX pipeline, as well as a First Peoples pipeline project to Churchill.
Once again, let's debate this question. The clock starts now.
I'd like to return to that concept of engagement and conversations. And we hear some good words here, but words will not get us reconciliation. It takes action. And going back to that story of as so vague as to be meaningless, unable to save lives, there's another story that really comes forward here. And that's someone by the name of Tristan DeRocher. Tristan walked all the way from La Ronge to Regina, nearly 700 kilometers. He then fasted just over there, outside the legislature, for 44 days, one day for each of the Sask Party MLAs who voted against a suicide prevention strategy. And instead of engaging in conversation, instead of meeting him, Mr. Moe, you sent two of your ministers across the road to basically say, get off my lawn. Not just to Doyle, but to every family who's lost someone, to every young person who is struggling right now with whether or not they feel their life is something they can continue.
Yeah, absolutely. There are two ministers in the government of Saskatchewan that did meet with Mr. DeRocher, and I think it's important for us all to realize that everyone agrees with what Mr. DeRocher is advocating for. He's advocating for the investment and the recognition of something that we all need to do, and we all need to work collaboratively on in reducing Indigenous suicides and in reducing suicides in northern Saskatchewan. The Pillars for Life strategy, you say it is not endorsed by experts, but it's endorsed by the Canadian Mental Health Association. It does lay out the strategy, the efforts, the action that needs to take place in the months and in the years ahead. One of those actions I mentioned already was a letter of commitment with the FSIN and the federal government to work specifically on Indigenous and northern suicides in this province. Well, this is a plan. This is a strategy for the province. It's a strategy that needs to be invested in the years ahead, and it will be.
That question remains then. If this is something you take seriously, if you really want to see action on this, why, instead of sitting down with Mr. DeRocher, with the Walking with Our Angels folks, why did you send the ministers with a very simple message? The message was, Pillars of Life is good enough, now go away, get off the lawn.
Most certainly not.
That was that young man to court. Why did you not meet with him? Why not have the conversation?
Do you regret, if you look back at the situation with Mr. DeRocher, do you regret not speaking to him? Do you regret taking him to court?
Our ministers met with Mr. DeRocher. They had a fulsome conversation with Mr. DeRocher. And this is a government that takes suicides, it takes mental health, and takes addictions very, very seriously. And I would point us back to just the most recent budget. $30 million increase in mental health investment. We're making sure that investment is coming with real outcomes for our communities and for our family members. That builds on a $30 million investment the year before. We're putting the investment there. We're going to ensure now that the outcomes are coming, but it's going to take some time.
Do you think, Mr. Moe, you would have done anything differently with Mr. DeRocher specifically? I think it was a very high-profile story, so I think Saskatchewan people want to know.
Those actions as I had referenced.
Thank you. I want to get to, last but not least, Alison Bamford from Global News.
Thanks, Molly. I've heard from teachers that over the 6-month school break, students slid back several reading levels and are now testing well below grade level. Many teachers don't think they'll be able to get their students to where they need to be for the next grade, given the current classroom conditions. What will you do to ensure teachers can get these students to grade level by the end of the school year?
Mr. Moe, 45 seconds.
Well, we didn't wait for a pandemic to invest in education in this province. We've built 57 new schools across the province. We had the highest investment in education in this last year's budget, and we're going to continue to invest in education. And yes, we've increased that investment by $155 million as a pandemic response. Used some of the contingency fund that we had in the budget to ensure that we are able to provide the resources that have been requested by teachers and by school divisions across this province. We have dispersed $51 million of those dollars. The rest will be dispersed on request. With those dollars, we've provided for over 440 staff that have come into our schools to ensure that our educators and most importantly our students have the supports that they need to ensure that they have every opportunity to succeed in this pandemic environment.
Mr. Miley.
Thanks very much for the question, Allison. It's a very good point. After having those months off, we're having kids trying to catch up in classrooms that were already overcrowded, already overstressed. We have more kids in our classes, but not just more kids with special needs, more kids coming to school with mental health troubles or coming to school hungry, because a quarter of children in Saskatchewan continue to live in poverty. COVID-19 has simply exposed the problems that already existed in our classrooms that teachers and parents have been speaking up about for years. And that's why we have to change it. And this is our commitment. We will invest and bring in hundreds of new teachers.
Bit of a hiccup there on the source feed of that video, Sheila, but I have to tell you, we still have a few minutes to go in this debate. I'm struck by how grown up both of them are compared to the absolute best we saw in the U.S. debate. Oh, here, we're back on.
We talked to parents. We talked to the school boards. We listened. We had a very public conversation on the return to school here in the province of Saskatchewan, and that is a good thing. And that allowed us to ensure that we were able to come up with a plan that was adaptable, that was flexible, and I would say that is effective. As our children are returning to school, there's contingency funds that were made available to ensure that that plan was backed up with the financial resources that it would need. And there's been over 440 staff that have now entered into our schools to ensure that it remains safe.
Not a single dollar more between a budget that was introduced prior to the pandemic and a budget that came in after the pandemic. Exactly the same amount until parents, teachers, families, kids spoke up and said, we're not okay with just hope that things are okay and go back to normal. Things were already a problem. Our classrooms were already overcrowded and overcomplex, and COVID-19 has simply exposed that even more. And yet still, we have yet to hear you acknowledge that our classes are overcrowded. Do you accept that there's too many kids in our classes and we have to make the investments now to bring down class sizes, especially in the middle of a pandemic?
Mr. Miley, how do you pay for those 1,000 new teachers? Where does that come from?
This is a core investment. To not do this right now would be the worst possible idea. We have Mr. Moe talking about his plan for austerity. He was asked the other day 5
Mr.
times.
Miley, where does that money come from?
Well,
I mean, we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with an oil slump. Where does that money come from for Saskatchewan taxpayers?
Well, this is an investment, and it's a key investment. But you know, Mr. Moe just threw out a word there. He had a little nice word there. He said higher taxes. Well, we've made a commitment. Unlike Mr. Moe, who's refused to rule out higher taxes for ordinary families, unlike Mr. Moe, who raised the PST by $800 per family back in 2017, we will not raise taxes for ordinary families by a single cent. The only increase that we are committed to is asking those very few families, those folks with over $15 million free and clear in assets, to pay a little bit.
Another hiccup on the feed there. I'm surprised, and I've never seen it before, a CTV reporter actually press a New Democrat 2 or 3 times in a row
$1.7
where he's going to pay for
plus
some.
the $4 billion that you missed. You were accounting
Oh, hiccups
with
on
your
the
tax
feed.
increase for 1%. 1% of your
refuse.
deficit spending that you
Why
have put
won't you
forward.
rule out-
Where is the other
Let's let him
99%
respond.
going to come from? It's going to come from you.
Perfect time, gentlemen. Let's go back to our last question of the night. Alison Bamford standing by.
Switching gears from education, in Saskatchewan this year, overdoses are on track to kill more than double the number of people than COVID-19, impaired driving, and car accidents combined. What will you do to immediately address this crisis and save lives?
Mr. Miley, the floor is open.
Thank you very much, Allison. We hear the stories of people who've lost sons and daughters. These are not just numbers, not just statistics. These are people's lives. And as a dad, I feel that same fear, right? You try to raise your kids, you try to help them make good choices, but you worry what will happen. Crystal meth has made our streets less safe. Opioids are taking lives. And now we have a government that is talking about cuts. That's a bad idea anytime. But right now, it's a dangerous, dangerous notion. Now is when we need to invest. That's why we're committed to supporting harm reduction, to a crystal meth and opioid strategy, and to bringing in dedicated mental health and addictions emergency rooms so people get the care they need right away.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Mr. Moe.
I would just say this is a very important. Consultation at 8B, it requires investment. As I said earlier, we have a $435 million mental health and addictions budget in the province, the highest it's ever been. It's up $30 million from last year. That built on a $30 million increase the year before, and that's going into things like detox beds, additional detox beds in our major centres. It's going into a crystal meth treatment centre in the community of Estevan. It's going into more addictions workers in our major centres.
Hiccups, unfortunately, Sheila, but while we're waiting for the connection to jump back in, give me 30 seconds of your thoughts on the debate so far.
Everybody seems like a grown-up in the room, which is interesting. I did see somebody in the live chat wondering, where the heck is John Gormley, Saskatchewan radio
crystal
host?
meth or opioids. I'm ready to make
John
a change.
Gormley.
Yeah,
And
why
we
is
have
he
to
not
tell
a moderator?
Yeah,
Tell them,
yeah.
we'd love to help you. But you're going to be waiting 3 months, 6 months, a year and a half before you can get any care. And we might as well be telling people, we just don't think you're worth it. Go back and start using again. And this is what frustrates me the most. We've seen wait times grow for mental health and addiction services, for surgeries, for MRIs in our emergency rooms. And I just got to ask, what are we waiting for? When is this government actually going to do something about wait times? Well, New Democrats will. We'll bring in hundreds of new healthcare professionals, nurses, doctors. We'll bring down those wait times so that you can get the care you need when you need it.
With respect to the investment, and I talked about our investment in mental health, going into those very detox beds, going into the staff that would be working with those individuals, that's where that $30 million this year and last year is going. We are continuing to invest in urgent care centres in Saskatoon and Regina, which will have a mental health and addictions component to those, to ensure that we are increasing that continuum of care. We costed ours out fully at $15 million each, and Mr. Miley's a little bit lower than that. That's where one of the inaccuracies of his costed platform is. We've also added our core services to our healthcare with record funding over the course of the last number of years. We've brought 900 physicians.
You know, as you were saying, John Gormley has an audience larger than
Give them new facilities to care for our family members. The doctors and nurses that you have promised in your platform, with all due respect, Mr. Miley, don't even replace the doctors and nurses that left this province the last time the NDP had the opportunity to govern.
Gentlemen, we have about a minute left in this part. I want to ask about the safe consumption site, first of its kind in Saskatchewan. I learned that citizens raised money to make sure that runs well. Would either of your governments fund that going forward?
The other day I stood up with Mary Adjeritis, who's a mother and an advocate in Saskatoon, and she lost her son to opioids. And she said something that really stuck with me.
Well, I apologize again to our viewers for the hiccups we're getting from the live feed. There's 6 minutes left in the debate. Hopefully we'll hear one last question, although I think this is the last question.
Yep.
Reduction,
Sounds
but
like
also to making the investments in prevention, in early assessment, early treatment, and these dedicated mental health and addictions emergency rooms. So instead of getting sent away, as we see so often today, people get the help they need and deserve.
Mr. Moe, would you fund a safe consumption site?
I would point back. We would consider the safe consumption site if we have the honor to form government on October the 26th, and we would consider it alongside all of the other investments that we have made, that we continue to expand on, to ensure that families and family members that are experiencing drug and addictions have the supports that they need. This is an investment that's in the works. It's an investment that needs to continue regardless of who's government in the future.
Well, it is time already to wrap up the debate. We have 2 minutes for each of you for your closing statements, and we will start tonight with the Sask parties. Scott Moe.
Well, thank you very much, Molly. And tonight you heard some very clear differences between the two main parties in this election, and a clear answer to the question: who do you trust to lead Saskatchewan's economic recovery? The Saskatchewan Party has a record of growth. The NDP do not. The Saskatchewan Party has a plan for a strong recovery. The NDP do not. The Saskatchewan Party has a plan to balance the budget. The NDP do not. And the Saskatchewan Party will make life more affordable, while the NDP's reckless spending will drive up the deficit, and it will drive up your taxes. So the choice is clear.
Oh, I'm sorry that the feed has cut out again when Scott Moe was making his closing pitch. I'd like to hear the NDP's closing pitch too.
Yeah, the NDP's closing pitch, though, I predict will be austerity is bad. It's time to make investments, which means spending other people's money. And debt is bad, except when we do it. Yeah. That's my prediction.
1,000 new teachers, but I won't tell you how I'll pay for them because it's an investment. Yep. And the one thing that I heard there just in the last few moments that caused me to raise an eyebrow was Scott Moe saying he'd consider a Toronto-style, Vancouver-style shooting gallery. By that I mean a drug use area where drug addicts, rather than getting treatment, will be allowed to use drugs with the approval, permission, support, and...
Saskatchewan Party has a plan for a strong recovery.
Here we go.
The NDP do not. The Saskatchewan Party has a plan to balance the budget. The NDP do not. And the Saskatchewan Party will make life more affordable, while the NDP's reckless spending will drive up the deficit, and it will drive up your taxes. So the choice is clear.
Thanks to our people across Saskatchewan have been having a much harder time. Mr. Moe refuses to rule out more cuts to health, more cuts to education, cuts that are a bad idea anytime and right now are downright dangerous. It's just not good enough. It's the wrong approach. The choice before us couldn't be any more clear. A tired, old Sask Party offering nothing but more cuts and privatization, or a new direction, a new vision that invests in people, gets our economy moving, and helps each other out in this difficult time. And that's why we plan. We plan to make sure every patient can get the care they need when and where they need it, that every kid gets the help from the teachers and EAs, the support they need to thrive in school, that every senior can stay home for as long as possible, and that every Saskatchewan worker is back on the job and making a decent wage, so that everyone, every person in Saskatchewan has a chance at a great life right here. Because this is our home. This is our home, and this is our chance to make it even better. So tonight, I ask for your support tonight and the weeks ahead and years ahead as we build that better future together. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Well, that is all the time we have for you tonight at the beautiful Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan. Thank you to both leaders for your passion for our province. Thank you to our panelists for all your amazing questions, and to all the people behind the scenes that made this night possible. Democracy is a beautiful privilege we have in this country. We hope you exercise that freedom by casting a ballot on October 26th. And just a reminder, if you want to vote by mail, applications are...
Well, Sheila, that's it for the debate. It was quite succinct. The whole debate, I think, was 54 minutes. But I think that was enough. As I was saying when we had one of the live stream hiccups there, You and I watched the debate of Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which was brutal and bloody and interrupty and just a mess. There were some, I'm not even going to call them heated moments. There were some, back and forth like a ping pong match here. But both leaders, I found, respectful of each other, respectful of the audience, and that is the Saskatchewan way. I had never heard Ryan Miley before. That's the NDP leader. He exceeded my extremely low expectations. Of course, he's a New Democrat, so he's going to say, hey, let's hire 1,000 new teachers union workers. And no, I'm not going to tell you how to pay for it. I thought the questions by the journalists were not bad. You had CTV, CBC, Global, you had Post Media there, and you had a Métis question asker. But you know what? 1/6 of Saskatchewan are First Nations or Métis. Sure. So it's not inappropriate. It is a big policy issue. And I didn't feel like the questions were sort of a Black Lives Matter identity hucksterism. I thought they were legit questions. There was an emphasis on mental health, drug addiction, and suicide. But again, that is a real policy issue there. And to some extent, it overlaps the Indigenous issues. So I didn't mind that. I mean, Saskatchewan, especially, both in the rural parts and the cities, there are a lot of Indigenous issues. I didn't mind one bit that there was a question on that. I thought it was fairly constructive questions. I'm just guessing the needle was not moved enough here to make a difference. I'm guessing that people pretty much know who Scott Moe is, and he was Scott Moe again. Reliable, looks the part, no surprises. Even when he came in our own Keean Bexty had a little scrum. I'm here for a high-minded debate against Mr. Miley or whatever he said.
Yep.
I think Saskatchewanians like that. And obviously the public sector unions and those who want more free stuff are going to vote NDP, but I just don't think that that's going to be enough. I don't know. I sort of liked the debate. It was a refreshing change from some of the absolute bludgeonings we've seen in other jurisdictions. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the questions were well crafted in that they revealed the stark differences between the two parties. All the answers, to hear the NDP say it, more government, more spending, more control. And when Scott Moe answered the question, he answered questions from, small government freedoms, personal responsibility, and business growth. I did think, though, there was one point at which Scott Moe had an opportunity to really tout what Saskatchewan is doing for First Nations communities and talk about the suicide and addictions issue. Because I don't think you can talk about the suicide rate in First Nations and Northern communities without talking about the lack of jobs and economic opportunities up there. And we know that Keystone XL just signed an agreement with a First Nations community near, it's a Cree community, sorry, the name escapes me right now, near Swift Current. And along with 4 other Alberta communities, Keystone XL has signed an agreement for an ownership stake, which is, building a future for First Nations communities. I think Scott Moe had an opportunity to talk about those successes in the First Nations community as a way out of poverty and a way to address addiction and suicide in Northern communities. And he didn't really, and that's such a good news story coming out of Keystone XL.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we know for a fact that the largest employer of Aboriginal people in Canada is the mining industry. Now, I'm including oil sands, which some oil sands are mined, but in Saskatchewan, it's your uranium, it's your potash. It's your other things that are mined. That is the #1 employer of Aboriginal people, and I think he could have contrasted with the NDPers, whose own candidate has said, we hate the oil sands, it should be left on the ground. Obviously, Jagmeet Singh. I think that kind of sharper elbows up debate style could have landed a few blows, but maybe that's not the Saskatchewan way. I think that Jagmeet Singh, who could not be clearer in his antipathy towards any outdoors work, mining, trucking, pipelines, railroads, agriculture, anything. How do you not hang that around the neck of your provincial NDP? How do you not, and forget about Jagmeet Singh if you think that's too mean. How about the fact that one of his own candidates came out against the oil sands, and forget the oil sands, just oil. Saskatchewan's conventional oil and gas production, if you call fracking conventional, is as large as Alberta's conventional oil production, that is taking out the oil sands. So I think that Scott Moe could have been tougher, but when you're that far ahead in the polls, when you're that far ahead in the seats, maybe your job is to be forgettable, like a tie on a man. The ideal tie, I think, is a tie that you don't remember that the guy wore. Was it a red tie or a blue tie? I didn't notice. Exactly. You don't want to make a fuss when you're in the lead. You don't want to be interesting. You just want to be done with it. And if the election is 12 days away, mission accomplished.
Yeah, and I think Scott Moe did a great job of articulating really what Saskatchewan is all about and what they've built their economy around. It is not just throwing money at the public sector the way the NDP there would like to think. He said three things. He said food, fuel, and fertilizer. That has built Saskatchewan's success. It will continue to build Saskatchewan's success because it is something Saskatchewan does well, but it's also something that everybody needs. And unfortunately for Saskatchewan, it's something that the Trudeau Liberals are punishing through a carbon tax. And that's a carbon tax the NDP in Saskatchewan support. Yeah. And I remember when Roy Romano came out against Kyoto because it would harm those three industries. Man, how the NDP have changed. They are not the blue-collar NDP of old, are they? Yeah,
well, listen, I'm old enough to remember that Roy Romano, the Saskatchewan NDP premier, balanced his budget before Ralph Klein did.
Yep.
Let me just look at some of my notes that I took down there, and I promise we'll get to the Super Chats. There's some amazing Super Chats there. Let's just kibitz for another 5 minutes or so, and then let's go to those Super Chats. You know what? Actually, I hear in my ear that we're going to contact Kian. And in terms of lines, Sheila, we might pause you for a second so we can add in Kian. I think it's a certain number of lines we got. So we're going to bring in the lad and see what he's up to. So, but hold your fire because we're going to bring you back. Okay. Let's see if we can't grab Kian. I'm going to look at some of my notes in the meantime. I actually thought the question... and believe it or not, I think it was from it wasn't from the CBC, I think it was from Global, about schools. I mean, kids have backslid. They've fallen behind in their studies. They've lost a year's worth of schooling. How are you going to catch them up? I thought that was an excellent question, and I would not call that a left-wing question. In fact, that's a question that I think is very real, something that a lot of mums and dads are thinking about. And it doesn't necessarily say, well, hire 1,000 more teachers. It also, frankly, criticizes some of the pandemic overreaction. Oh, I hear in my ear that we got Kian there. Hey, Kian, how you doing? I see you're in your lovely fall colors. Sheila and I were complimenting you on your rustic look. I'm joking around. Tell me what you thought of the debate tonight.
I think that Scott Moe probably did exactly what he should have done, and that was not be too outrageous. I could see a few times when it was clear he wanted to fight back with a little bit more rigor, but sort of restrained himself. There was a few opportunities where he could have turned the tables on his opponent. The leader of the NDP was going on and on, grilling Scott Moe about hiring people from out of province to get construction projects done, which is a very difficult thing to do, but he was sort of inflating the numbers, I think. Scott Moe could have just asked him, people, they hire people based off of what brings Saskatchewan. I forget what you corrected me at. I'm going to say Saskatchewaners.
They say Saskatchewan people or Saskatchewanians.
Saskatchewanians. Whatever brings them the best bang for their buck. And if it's hiring an Albertan firm or a French firm, whatever it is, it's keeping the budget front and center. But Scott Moe could have asked him why the NDP are hiring Alberta NDP staffers to run their campaign. It's almost like they can't find NDP supporters anywhere in the province themselves.
Yeah, I was just saying to Sheila that Scott Moe could have had elbows up and punched harder, but I think his goal was just don't even let people remember anything. Just come through like a breeze and be gone and get out unscathed. And I think he got out unscathed. You know, I want to say that I think that the New Democrat, Ryan Miley, there were two things he said that sort of perked my ears up, because I've become a bit of a blue-collar right-winger in my own way. As in, I realize that the left has renounced the working man. The NDP of today hates actual labor. They like government sector unions, but they wouldn't like anyone who actually drives a truck, does pipe fitting, that kind of thing. And with their trade deals with China and whatnot, they would sell out the industrial heartland. So, I mean, that was Trump's success in Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, is he was the blue-collar billionaire. And so when Ryan Miley said, what about all these Texas plates here getting the work? I thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, it's a different complaint to have foreigners come to Saskatchewan to work than what happened 10 years ago, Saskatchewan people going elsewhere. And when he said we've got the lowest minimum wage in the country and workers have had a 13 cents an hour raise, I'm not for minimum wages, but when you're talking about the state of the working poor, that is that Trump sweet spot, that we've got to take care of the working people. But that was quickly abandoned by Ryan Miley. I think that the key to the left is representing working people again. And I don't mean government sector unions, which was really the only thing we heard from Miley the whole way through. But other than that, nothing was interesting to me from what the New Democrat said, other than he was, I suppose, better behaved than, let's say, a Rachel Notley or a Jagmeet Singh would be.
Yeah, the coalition, I think, that the Saskatchewan Party is trying to get out to the polls is what they've been trying to get out to the polls for the last 10 years. And that is people who produce food. Scott Moe said it himself, people who produce food, people who produce fuel, and people who produce fertilizer. All three of those things, those families that those industries represent, the workers that those industries represent, are more than enough to form any government in Saskatchewan. And I think the polls speak for themselves right now. Scott Moe is almost polling at 60%, which for any Canadian political party, that is insane. He's laughing his way from the polls right now. So I think that the NDP are clearly, like, that if that conversation, that debate was anything to go by, they're just as out of touch with the people of Saskatchewan as the NDP are everywhere else in the country, except for maybe British Columbia, where they're sort of right on the pulse of British Columbians. Whether it's Alberta or Ontario, the NDP just sort of abandoned that old coalition that has historically done them well, specifically in Saskatchewan, and they don't represent the people that they used to anymore. And the Saskatchewan Party has just picked up a lot of that constituency.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's tough running against Scott Moe. The guy looks the part. He's the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't. It is true that until the pandemic, Saskatchewan had the strongest economy in the country. Actually, it still does by many measures, including unemployment. So how do you take on a guy who's got the best economy in the country? How do you take on a guy who, from the pandemic point of view, it's not, you know, the mass morgues of Montreal? I mean, other than PEI, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick, I think, and Newfoundland, yes, sorry, I mentioned that. I think that Saskatchewan actually has the lowest mortality from the pandemic. So you can't really take him on that. You can't take him on the economy. What do you take him on? And I mean, I wouldn't, and by the way, I think every incumbent government has probably a 10-point bump in Canada from the pandemic. You don't see that in the States, but in Canada, the media, the public health deep state, and the politicians are all moving together for safety. Last word to you, Kian. Are you glad you went there? I like the fact that you engaged with both leaders.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to be here. It's great to be able to cover things live on location. It's like we are, just like the rest of the folks in the media, just not the mainstream media. We're on location getting footage and asking questions, and we're able to relay it to our viewers live. I think that's really exciting. And to your point about Scott Moe running against him and trying to defeat him, you made the point about how well they're handling the pandemic, and it's true that they really are. They are, as Scott Moe even said in the debate, they have 90%. They're 90% below the death per capita average in Canada. I mean, they've managed to govern their way through this pandemic without restricting overly the freedoms of their people by enforcing provincial-wide mask bans. I mean, there are some issues, and we're going to be talking about them as this campaign progresses, particularly when it comes to what's going on in northern Saskatchewan with some fines that have been leveled against religious groups. So we're going to be certainly grilling Scott Moe ourselves on that as this election goes forward, because the mainstream media certainly, while they might be grilling Scott Moe on other things, they're not really grilling him from our side of the political spectrum. So we'll be sure to keep doing that.
There are no international flights to Saskatchewan. There weren't many to begin with, and they were shut down 6 months ago. So that is one factor. It's a non-dense population as opposed to Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. So there were certain things inherent in the province. I don't think the death toll was 90% below. I think he said it was 62% or something. But you're right, it's tough. You know, there was an interesting moment where the New Democrat was talking about a mandatory mask law for a province the size of France. But with a population of 1.2 million. Scott Moe wouldn't go for it, but actually in his own way, the New Democrat wouldn't really commit to it. He was just trying to poke around there. But imagine saying, hey everybody, we got 1.2 million souls in a piece of land the size of France. And we're going to say, if you're way out in Tisdale, or you're way out in Edensbridge, or you're way up at Swift Current, and you're driving on a highway, you got to wear a mask. I mean, I think Saskatchewan people would have thrown that out. Last word to you, Kean, then we're going to bring Sheila back in.
All right. I mean, anyone could guess. I think this election is pretty much in the bag for Scott Moe. But as I said, we're going to keep on him, just as we are on the NDP leader, but we're going to be asking questions the mainstream media just won't. So, stay tuned for that.
Right on. Thanks, Kean, and thanks for going there, and say hi to Mocha for us.
He's right behind the camera. He says hi.
All right. Okay, there you have it. Kean Bexte asking a couple of great questions of both leaders as they went in. I was glad he did. And now we're going to bring back our chief reporter, who is based in Edmonton, not too far away from Saskatchewan. I'm talking about Sheila Gunn-Reid. I just hear in my ear from our producer, director, Fancy Pants. He's not that fancy pants. I don't know why I said that, but he's slightly fancy. We got a bunch of super chats I'd like to get through. It's 9:17 Eastern time. Sheila, how you doing out there?
I'm doing great.
All right, we jump right in to the super chats, and I think we can get through all the super chats.
I definitely think we can, unless our viewers are feeling especially generous and start dumping some more money into the super chats to support the work that we did here tonight, which would be great. I'll stay on and read these things as long as you need me to, as long as they're coming in. But yes, maybe we should get to a few of them.
Well, that's nice of you to say. Now, the one that we left off on was MEDW, $5. Quick Dick McDick in Tufnell, Saskatchewan brings up a lot of good points regarding how carbon taxes affects oil and food prices. Any thoughts on interviewing him? I'm not as familiar with him as I should be. I see him all the time.
I'm very.
Brad Wall retweets him all the time. He's got that great beard.
Oh, it's great.
And that just really ticks the pogonophilia button.
Yep.
That's a Latin word for people who love beards.
I do.
Sheila, what do you have to say to MEDW's question?
I will reach out to him. Quick Dick McDick and I are Twitter friends, QDM as he calls himself. I love his common sense. He's a farmer, he's a trucker, he's a normal guy living a normal life who just took to YouTube and started doing these fun little videos full of common sense. He's so perfectly Saskatchewan. And yes, I will reach out to him because I am personally a fan. And I had no idea that he had like t-shirts on his little merch store. So, you know me, I love a good t-shirt. So I might have to get me one of those two to support the work that QDM does.
Right on. Well, there you go. Richard Michael, 2 enormous super chats in a row. Just incredible. Each for $140. Oh, and I hear in my ear there's actually a third one.
Third. Yeah.
So that's 280 smackers for Richard Michael, who says, drain the Canadian swamp. Well, Richard, we will do our best. And thank you for your support. Harley Ray, $30. Thank you, Rebel, for covering the Saskatchewan debate. Well, I'm glad we did it.
Yeah, I thought it was fun.
Yeah, I thought it was fun too. Murray Reinders, $7. Haven't watched the CBC in 28 years. Well, you've been paying for it, though. You've been paying for it. Matt Kircher, $2. Why is Miley asking all the questions? You know, I thought the format was okay, and I thought the two candidates were fairly well behaved. That's the Saskatchewan way. You know, it's not the Chicago way. Ezra Hicks, $10. As a conservative from Indiana in the United States, Mo seems like the best based on policy. I'll admit I'm not as well informed about Canadian politics as I should be. Also kind of nice not constantly hearing Trump's fault. Yeah, you're so right. You know, I mean, Saskatchewan has, as you heard there, about 1.2 million people. So it is not a large province. If it were a state, it would be one of the smallest. Yeah. But we love it. It's got a lot of heart, and it kept the flame of conservative ideas burning when it flickered out in the rest of the country. I'll read one more, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sheila.
Sure.
El Chupacabra, $70. Thank you very much for that. Thanks for the coverage, Rebel Team. Thoughts on the debate? We have them, and we're sharing them. I am pleased to have watched it. I don't think a lot of minds were likely moved. The one thing that bugged me a bit, as I mentioned earlier, was Scott Moe saying he's going to be open to a place where drug use is actually encouraged, aided, abetted, supported. What's the word that people use? Codependent, where you're actually enabling. That's that word.
Enabled.
Yeah, and I expect to hear that from some, I'm going to use the word fancy pants, from Hastings Street in Vancouver or the worst parts of Toronto. I expect to hear that from John Tory, failed mayor of Toronto. I don't expect to hear that from a common sense premier of Saskatchewan. I mean, what are you doing? Why do you? I'll pay for the plane ticket to send Scott Moe to Hastings Street in Vancouver, or send him down to San Francisco, which is one big giant shooting gallery. I'll pay for the ticket. Because not only will it save Saskatchewan taxpayers millions of dollars, it'll save hundreds of lives. The one thing I'm glad I heard, and there was a reporter who mentioned it, I can't remember which one, it might have even been Molly Thomas from CTV, or maybe it was Allison from Global. More people in Saskatchewan have died from drugs, if I heard her right, than from the pandemic, and she listed a bunch of other things combined. So I'm glad she's not a pandemic panicker. Yeah, absolutely. Same in BC. I don't have the stats, but I'm sure it's the same in Alberta. Opioids, also from China, like the virus, killing more Canadians, at least in the western provinces. I don't know the stats for Ontario. Probably true. Probably true in Quebec, too. I just don't have the stats.
Yeah, Chinese fentanyl is killing a lot of people in the western part of the country. And frankly, a lot of that has to do with Justin Trudeau giving everybody $2,000 a month, including homeless, mentally ill, drug-addicted people. I mean, unfortunately, you just gave them the drugs or the money they need to buy the drugs to kill themselves. There must have been a better way, but Justin Trudeau didn't see it. And with these supervised injection sites, they cause just the complete and total unraveling of the social fabric in the communities in which they're plunked. And what we know from the fentanyl problem is that it affects upper income people, at least younger upper income people, at the same rate as it does people from, poverty-stricken areas. But they don't put them in upper middle class areas. They don't put these drug consumption sites in those areas. They put them in poor neighborhoods that are trying to rebuild themselves, and they will never rebuild themselves as long as those horrible places are there.
Yeah, you know what? How about let's make a new rule? whoever proposes to have these injection sites, let it be next to their house or their children's school.
Yeah, they
don't
can
put
have the drug addict leaning on their cars all night. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. We see that in Toronto. It's terrifying, and you can't even go to the parks anymore. Forget about the official drug zones, but just any city park. It's so gross, and that was just a weird thing, and I hope that was just a hiccup or a little flight up the flagpole, see who salutes moment by Scott Moe. That is the most un-Saskatchewan thing I've ever heard.
Jason Kenney needs to pick up the phone and call Scott Moe, because Jason Kenney has been firmly against these supervised injection sites, and he refuses to back down. He's throwing money into drug treatment to help people become functional members of society again, so that they can rejoin their families and not be enabled right into their graves. So Jason Kenney, if you're watching, call Scott Moe.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, if you want to win an election, and some politicians do, don't listen to your drug user potheads like Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau legalized marijuana because Justin Trudeau likes marijuana. It's the only policy file that he's deeply passionate about, because he's a lifelong drug user. That's not my accusation. That's him, he boasts about it. But I should tell you that drug legalization is the terror of every mum and a lot of dads in this country, because you think, oh, that's so, just like, is my kid going to get on this? This is not something about cool parents smoking pot. No. This is about, now it's legal, so now it's everywhere, and now there's a pot shop on every street, and it's so ubiquitous, you don't think that's in the playgrounds? That is a concern for every mum, and frankly, a lot of new Canadians who come from places that aren't as lascivious, libertine, or louche as Justin Trudeau. What do you think of that alliteration?
Very nice.
Thank you very much.
And if people really want to see how these supervised consumption sites have failed, just go to the downtown east side. They have conducted a human experiment there for the last 2 decades, and nothing is any better. It's much worse if you ask police. Can we get even a still image? If you can get B-roll of it, great. Hastings Street in Vancouver. It is near the Carnegie Library there, which tells you, I don't know if you know the story, Sheila. Andrew Carnegie, one of the greatest industrialists in America, endowed beautiful, gorgeous architectural libraries all across North America. He just built these libraries. That was his gift to the people. And you're on Hastings Street and you see this gorgeous library, and all around it is the wreckage of humanity. You feel like, you've been to refugee, just the whole street, people on drugs on the street, people out of their minds. This isn't even bad. This is just human That was
just
suffering.
A random person filming. That gives you the lightest flavor for it, but there are parts, it's so dense. It's been a few years since I've been there. I have no reason to go there. You feel like I've been in a refugee camp in Iraq, and that's the closest feeling I got, except for in the refugee camps in Iraq, people are trying to have a clean place to live.
Yeah, they're doing their best.
Yeah, they're doing their best. Actually, it's like look at this. It's just squalor and drugs right there, and violence and madness. This is what I'm talking about. This is what it's like. I think some people are selling some stuff there, but look to the right there. This is the most un-Saskatchewan thing you'll see in your life, and Scott Moe wants to bring that to town. Look at those people there. And hey, let's enable this. Hey, let's support this. What are you doing?
It is the most inhumane thing you can do to somebody, is to help them continue to languish in this existence.
Is not an anomaly. That's it all the time.
Everywhere.
Can you grab me an image? I want to show the Carnegie Library. And the reason that sticks in my mind is because when I was there, I saw this gorgeous library. But it shows like the pride of the city. and how, like it's got that Detroit feeling of ruins. It's like Planet of the Apes, where he discovers the Statue of Liberty tumbled down in the beach. Remember that scene? And you realize he was on Earth the whole time, but it had fallen. That's what the drug policy in Vancouver has done. I know I'm going on about it.
I know.
But it's my way of criticizing Scott Moe.
It's
Justin
a
says the picture
there.
says, let's just take a look anyways. I mean, you just grab a picture at random on the internet. But I just remember, to me, it's the juxtaposition. Yeah, throw something up, even if it's not demonstrative of the point I'm making. I just want to show the juxtaposition. I think that's where it is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That used to be quite a thing. All right, let's get off that issue. I think we got some more super chats here.
I was just going to mention how the NDP like to push these sorts of drug consumption sites because they are so deeply entrenched in the poverty and suffering industry around this. Remember the Portland Hotel Society in Vancouver, all the NDP mucky mucks that were involved in that were enriching themselves and taking vacations with their families on the money that was meant to help the
and we heard the same thing from, was it Lethbridge, where the drug shooting up places just pocketed.
Every time these places come up, everything goes bad. Yeah. It's a formula. Anyways, let's keep going. Murray Reinders gives us $6.99. NDP only care about unions. Yeah, Kean did talk about that, didn't he? That they used to be the party of farmers and blue collar workers, and they call themselves the party of the labor movement, but they are severely disconnected from anybody who makes a living with their back in their hands these days.
Yeah.
Richard Michael gives us another $140.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
$340 super chats. Thank you very much, Richard. Elizabeth Roy gives us $6.99. I don't see a super chat there. DD Raptor gives us $5 and says, live in Saskatchewan. The only NDP signs I've seen are in Ryan Miley's riding, where some leftist elites live. But by the way, Ezra, you are right to say Saskatchewanians, because I'm a Fort Saskatchewanian, and that's what we call ourselves. So,
some folks say Saskatchewanite. I also hear Saskatchewan people. It's like Hong Kong. There's about 3 ways to say it.
Yeah.
Hong Kongese. That just sounds funny to me. I like saying Hong Kong people.
Another Hong Konger.
Yeah, Hong Konger is another way to do it. Fent Class chips in $1. Thank you very much. Listen, I appreciate everyone joining us. I know it's not the same momentous clash of the titans as Trump versus Biden that we co-hosted the other day, and it's not as large a jurisdiction as some of the other when we cover election night or things like that. But I enjoyed going deep on Saskatchewan for a couple hours. Sheila, I'm very grateful to you as always for co-hosting with me, and it was fun to have Kean join in. And I was ribbing the lad a little bit. Even calling him a lad is, I guess, a form of ribbing him, but he's doing so well. And I love how he zips around. And one day he's in BC, one day he's in Saskatchewan, one day he's in Ottawa, where he was stinging Catherine McKenna. Asked great questions, really got under her skin just by asking good questions. So I think he's doing a great job. And our cameraman Mocha, who's out there in Regina, the Queen City, with him. Is there anything else you want to raise? I think we got all of the super chats covered. We've been giving her for 2 hours. Yep. And, I think that we can say goodnight if there's no more folks. And I want to say thank you to Justin for working late, as he always does. Thanks to Mike, who put together the fancy yellow and green screen behind me. And I feel like an auctioneer saying going once, going twice, gone. Sheila, we'll see you soon. Everybody, we'll see you tomorrow. You're doing the live stream tomorrow, is that right, at 12 noon?
I am doing the live stream tomorrow with David. So hopefully Lisa Proust tunes in and sends us our love again tomorrow. Right on. Special thanks to all the super chatters, including the most incredible triple super chatter, Richard Michael, who chipped in $420 tonight, which is just amazing. Thank you for that generosity.
As you may know, 70% of that comes to us. YouTube does take a healthy slice, but the rest of it comes to us. So it's an important way to help keep the lights on. On that note, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters and Rebels around the world like Sheila, Kian, Mocha, and others, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.